So, welcome to your first video. Today we're going to talk about Introduction to Chemistry as part of Chapter 1. Your targets for this chapter are shown on this PowerPoint slide. Today we're going to focus on 3 of them with this video. First one we're going to talk about is defining chemistry and matter. Then we're going to identify steps of the scientific method. And then we're going to use those steps to design an experiment that collects data. So let's go ahead and get started. What is chemistry? Chemistry is the study of the components of matter and the changes it undergoes. So we're going to talk about matter and what matter does and how it behaves. But what is matter? Matter is simply anything that has a mass and occupies space. So over the summer, Pokemon Go came out. So if you play Pokemon Go, and if Pokemon were real, they would be consisting of matter. They have a mass and they occupy space. Some of you have talked about becoming famous musicians and rappers. If you go ahead and make your own mixtape or demo CD, that has mass and occupies space. So that is matter. Matter is really anything that is an object, a person, a living thing. If it has mass and occupies space, it's defined as matter. So how do we study chemistry? How do we study science or matter in general? How did scientists do all that? We used to call it the scientific method. I don't really like to call it anymore. It's the same thing, but really what we do is we have an engineering design that we use and implement to study chemistry. Some of the factors or steps for engineering design include coming up with a question. What question are you trying to answer? What are you trying to figure out through your experiments? What is this little kid trying to do? He's trying to answer some sort of question. Once you have a guiding question, you want to make a hypothesis. The hypothesis will be tested in an experiment. And then you collect your data and figure out if that hypothesis answers the question or not. Okay? So same idea as the scientific method, but just different wording and a little bit simpler in my opinion. So some factors to include when designing your experiment. How do we design an experiment? Some factors to include are independent and dependent variable. Your independent variable is the thing being tested. And usually you only have one variable being tested. And that's it. Your dependent variable is what you're using to compare with the independent variable. For example, if I wanted to have an experiment with the different brands of gum and figure out which one had the longest lasting flavor, I would need to come up with an independent variable, and that could be that my independent variable is flavor. I'm trying to test which one has a longer lasting flavor. My dependent variable would be the thing that I'm comparing between the brands, okay? And that would be time. I'm comparing, or I'm going to measure the time it takes for the flavor for each brand of gum to go away. And I can graph that once I've done my experiment. And let's say this was take 5 and this was orbit or something like that. And I use a bar graph to compare different things because I'm comparing 2 different objects. So this was orbit. And I can compare the time it took for the flavor to go away versus the brand. Okay? But my dependent variable and my independent variable are right here. Okay? So, how do we design an experiment? Continued. Some other factors to consider when designing an experiment are your control group, or the group that has or does not have, I should say, the independent variable. And then your experimental group would be the group that does have the independent variable. And we'll talk about this tomorrow a little bit more with the activity we're going to do in class. So far though, what we've done is we've defined chemistry and matter, so we got that done. Remember, chemistry is the study of matter and the change it undergoes, and matter is anything that occupies space and has a mass. We've then identified the steps of the scientific method. There was finding a guiding question to answer. coming up with a hypothesis, and then designing an experiment to test the hypothesis. And then we talked about how to design an experiment with independent variables, dependent variables, control groups, and experimental groups. Again, we're going to talk about this more in depth in class. If you have any questions, bring them to class tomorrow. Other than that, have a great night.